The Orkney Islands lay cradled in the arms of a restless sea, their cliffs battered by waves that whispered secrets older than the stones. In the summer of 1843, the village of Stromness clung to the shore, its slate-roofed cottages hunched against the wind, their hearths flickering with tales of the deep. The North Sea was both life and death to its people. Its bounty fed their tables, its storms claimed their sons. And among them was Calum MacLeod, a fisherman of 30 winters, his hands calloused from nets, his eyes the grey of a coming gale. He lived alone in a cottage by the cliffs, his heart as solitary as the gulls that wheeled above the waves. Calum was no stranger to the sea's moods. He knew its tides, its currents, the way the seals watched from the rocks with eyes too human for comfort. The old folk of Stromness spoke of Selkies, shape-shifting seal women who shed their skins to dance on the shore under the moon. "Leave them be," his grandmother had warned, her voice a rasp by the fire. "Steal a Selkie's skin, and ye bind her to ye, but the sea never forgets." Calum had laughed, his youth bold, but the tales lingered, woven into the wind's howl and the waves' lament. One moonlit night, as the tide retreated, Calum walked the shore, his nets empty, his thoughts heavy with a poor season. The sea was calm, its surface a mirror reflecting a sky ablaze with stars. He paused by a rocky cove where the waves lapped gently and saw them, figures dancing on the sand, their forms graceful, their laughter a melody that rivaled the sea's song. They were women, their hair flowing like kelp, their skin glowing with an ethereal light. Seals bobbed in the shallows, their eyes fixed on the dancers, and Calum's breath caught. Selkies, their skins shed on the rocks, their dance a secret the sea allowed only under the moon. Among them was one who drew his gaze, a woman with hair like midnight waves, her eyes the green of deep water, her movements fluid as the tide. She spun, her laughter a ripple that stirred Calum's heart, a longing he had never known. He hid behind a boulder, his pulse racing, the old tales echoing in his mind. Her seal skin lay nearby, a shimmering pelt of silver and grey, its surface alive with the sea's pulse. The temptation was a fire in his chest, to take it, to bind her, to claim a piece of the sea's magic for himself. He moved before he could think, his hands snatching the pelt, its warmth startling against his skin. He buried it in his coat and fled, the Selkie's laughter fading, the seal's cries rising in protest. At his cottage, he hid the skin beneath the floorboards, his heart pounding with guilt and desire. The night passed, the moon sinking, and at dawn a knock came at his door. There she stood, the Selkie, her hair damp, her eyes searching, her voice a soft tide. "I am Ailsa," she said, her gaze piercing. "Ye have taken something of mine." Calum's throat tightened, the pelts weight a secret beneath his feet. "I've taken nothing," he lied, his voice rough. Ailsa stepped closer, her presence filling the room, her scent of salt and heather intoxicating. "The sea knows," she whispered, her eyes holding his, a mix of sorrow and defiance. She could not leave, he realized, the stories were true. A stolen skin bound her to the land, to him. Guilt gnawed at him, but so did longing, and he offered her shelter, his voice trembling. "Stay," he said. "Are the seas cruel this season?" Ailsa stayed, her presence a light in the cottage, her silence heavy with unspoken truths. She cooked with him, mended nets, her hands deft but her eyes ever turning to the sea. The villagers noticed, their whispers sharp. Calum had taken a bride, a stranger with eyes too deep, a voice too melodic. Some crossed themselves, others left offerings of shells at the cliffs, fearing the sea's wrath. Calum felt it too. A tension in the air, a storm brewing beyond the horizon, the seals watching from the rocks with accusing gazes. By winter their bond grew, a fragile love woven from shared silences and stolen glances. Ailsa sang as she worked, her voice a lullaby that calmed the wind, her songs of the sea's depths, of coral halls and forgotten gods. Calum listened, his heart torn between love and guilt, the pelt a secret he could not confess. One night as the fire crackled, Ailsa spoke, her voice low. "The sea calls me," she said, her eyes on the window, where waves crashed against the cliffs. "Without my skin, I'm half a soul, bound to a land that's not mine." Calum's hand trembled, the floorboards beneath him a weight he could not ignore. "Ye are safe here," he said, but his words rang hollow. That night the wind howled, carrying a cry, not Ailsa's, but the sea's, a wail that shook the cottage. The seals gathered at the shore, their barks a chorus of rage, their eyes glowing in the dark. Ailsa woke, her face pale, her hands clutching the air as if reaching for something lost. "They know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The sea will not forgive." At dawn the village was abuzz, nets torn, boats unmoored, fish vanished from the shallows. The old folk spoke of the sea's curse, of Selkies wronged, of spirits older than the cliffs. Calum stood by the shore, Ailsa at his side, her eyes fixed on the waves. A figure appeared in the mist, a woman, her form like Ailsa's but older, her hair a tangle of seaweed, her eyes burning with the sea's wrath. Her cry was a dirge, a warning, and Calum's heart sank. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice trembling. Ailsa's gaze was steady, her voice a tide. "My mother," she said, "a Selkie queen come to claim what's hers." The sea roared, waves crashing higher, the air thick with salt and menace. Calum gripped Ailsa's hand, his love a storm within him, but the pelt beneath his floorboards burned in his mind. The Selkie queen's wail grew, a sound that wove sorrow and fury, calling the sea to rise. Ailsa's eyes met his, her voice soft but resolute. "Return it," she pleaded, "or the sea will take us all." Calum hesitated, his heart torn, the cottage a prison of his own making. The waves surged, the queen's cry a blade in the wind, and Stromness trembled under the weight of a curse awakening. The sea roared around the Orkney Islands, its waves clawing at the cliffs of Stromness as if to tear the village from the earth. The summer of 1843 had turned bitter, the skies heavy with clouds that bled rain, the air thick with the salt of an angry tide. Calum MacLeod stood at his cottage door, his hands gripping the frame, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Selkie queen's wail lingered, a sound that wove sorrow and fury into the wind. Ailsa stood beside him, her midnight hair damp, her green eyes reflecting the sea's unrest. The seals crowded the shore, their barks a chorus of accusation, their eyes glowing like embers in the dusk. The pelt beneath Calum's floorboards burned in his mind, a secret that bound Ailsa to him and the village to a curse. The days grew darker, the sea's wrath unrelenting. Nets returned empty, their threads torn as if by unseen hands. Boats rocked on waves that rose without warning, their timbers groaning under an invisible weight. The villagers whispered in the tavern, their faces pale, their hands clutching charms of bone and shell. "The sea's turned against us," old Morag said, her eyes darting to Calum's cottage. "The stranger ye have taken, lad, she's no mortal woman." Calum's jaw tightened, his love for Ailsa a storm within him, but the weight of her stolen skin pressed heavier with each passing night. Ailsa's presence in the cottage was a light and a shadow. She moved with grace, mending nets with fingers that seemed to know the sea's weave, her songs a lullaby that calmed the gales. But her eyes were restless, always turning to the window where the waves called her name. "I feel it," she said one evening, her voice a soft tide, her hands twisting a strand of kelp. "My heart's out there with the deep. Without my skin, I'm a ghost on land." Calum's heart ached, the floorboards beneath him a silent accusation. He wanted to confess, to return the pelt, but fear held him. Fear of losing her, fear of the sea's judgment. The Selkie queen's wail returned each night, circling the cliffs, a cry that rattled the cottages' shutters and stirred the seals to frenzy. The villagers left offerings, fish, shells, woven reeds at the shore, praying for mercy, but the sea only grew wilder. One night, as the moon hid behind clouds, the queen appeared again, her form rising from the waves, her seaweed-tangled hair streaming like a storm. Her eyes burned, not with sorrow, but with rage, her wail a blade that cut through the village. "Return what ye have stolen," she sang, her voice a chorus of the deep, "or the sea will claim all." Calum stood frozen, Ailsa at his side, her hand trembling in his. The queen's gaze pierced him, her eyes seeing the pelt's hiding place, the sin he could not undo. Ailsa's voice broke the silence, steady but laced with pain. "She's my mother," she said, her words heavy. "Bound to Manannán MacLeod, the sea's god. My skin is his gift, a piece of his realm. Without it, the balance breaks." Calum's breath caught, the name of the ancient god a weight he could not bear. The old tales spoke of Manannán, lord of the waves, whose wrath drowned islands, whose gifts bound the living to the sea's will. The village gathered at the shore, their lanterns flickering, their faces etched with fear. Old Morag stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Give it back, Calum," she said, her hands clutching a shell charm. "The sea's no place for mortal greed." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others crossing themselves, their eyes on Ailsa, who stood like a figure from a ballad, her hair whipping in the wind. Calum's heart tore, he loved her, a love deeper than the sea, but the pelt was his chain, his curse. He turned to Ailsa, his voice breaking. "If I return it, will ye leave?" Ailsa's eyes met his, green as the deep, her silence a tide of sorrow. "I am the sea," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "Without my skin I fade, with it I cannot stay." The queen's wail surged, waves crashing higher, swallowing the shore's edge. The seals roared, their bodies thrashing, their eyes fixed on Calum. He felt the sea's gaze, a presence older than the cliffs, watching, waiting. The cottage seemed to groan, the floorboards creaking, as if the pelt itself demanded release. That night Calum knelt by the hearth, his hands trembling as he pried up the floorboards. The pelt shimmered, its silver-grey surface alive with the sea's pulse, its warmth a heartbeat that matched Ailsa's songs. He held it, his fingers tracing its edges, his heart a storm of love and guilt. Ailsa watched, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. "Ye could keep it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Bind me to ye, but the sea will not forgive." The queen's wail echoed outside, a cry that shook the earth, and Calum knew the truth. The sea's wrath would spare no one, not even Ailsa. He carried the pelt to the shore, the village trailing behind, their lanterns a procession of flickering hope. The Selkie queen stood atop a rock, her form glowing, her wail a dirge that wove the stars into the waves. Calum knelt, the pelt in his hands, his voice raw. "Take it," he said, his eyes on Ailsa. "I'd rather lose ye than see ye fade." Ailsa stepped forward, her fingers brushing the pelt, her eyes filling with tears. The queen's cry softened. a melody of sorrow and release as Ailsa took the skin, its light enveloping her. The sea surged, waves embracing Ailsa as she draped the pelt over her shoulders. Her form shimmered, her body shifting, her eyes glowing with the deep's green fire. She was no longer human but Selkie, her laughter a ripple that joined the waves. The queen's wail faded, her form dissolving into the mist, her eyes on Calum a mix of gratitude and warning. Ailsa turned to him, her voice a song that lingered in the wind. "I'll sing for ye," she said, her words a promise. Then she dove, her body a streak of silver, the seals following, their cries a chorus of farewell. The village stood silent, the sea calming, its surface a mirror once more. Calum returned to his cottage, his heart empty but whole, the hearth cold without Ailsa's songs. The villagers spoke of the night in hushed tones, their offerings renewed, their fear of the sea tempered by awe. The curse had lifted, the nets filling, the storms easing, but Calum felt its weight. A love lost to the deep, a debt paid but never forgotten. On moonlit nights when the tide was low, Calum walked the shore, listening for Ailsa's song. Sometimes he heard it, a melody that wove through the waves, a lullaby that calmed his soul. The seals watched, their eyes no longer accusing but kind, and Calum knew she was there, a Selkie bound to the sea, her love a light in the dark. The Orkney seas whispered secrets in the twilight, their waves lapping at the cliffs of Stromness with a rhythm that spoke of loss and longing. Months had passed since Ailsa returned to the deep, her silver-grey form a fleeting shadow among the seals, her song a faint melody carried on the wind. The village had found peace, its nets heavy with fish, its boats steady on calmer tides. Yet Calum MacLeod's cottage stood silent, its hearth dim, its walls echoing with the absence of Ailsa's laughter. He walked the shore each night, his eyes scanning the waves, his heart tethered to a love that belonged to the sea. In the deep Ailsa swam, her Selkie skin a cloak of freedom, its shimmer blending with the ocean's currents. The sea was her home, its coral halls and kelp forests a realm of light and shadow where she danced with her kin. The seals followed her, their eyes bright with joy, their barks a chorus that echoed her songs. Yet her heart lingered on the shore where Calum's silhouette stood against the cliffs, his presence a pull she could not ignore. The Selkie queen, her mother, watched from the depths, her seaweed-tangled hair flowing, her eyes heavy with a warning unspoken. "Stay with us," she sang, her voice a tide that carried the weight of Manannán MacLeod's will. "The land binds ye to pain." Ailsa's songs grew softer, their notes laced with sorrow for the life she had left. She swam to the surface on moonlit nights, her head breaking the waves, her eyes fixed on Stromness. She saw Calum, his face weathered, his hands clutching a shell she had once given him. Her voice rose, a lullaby that wove through the sea's roar, reaching him across the divide. Calum paused, his breath catching, the melody a spark in his darkened world. He whispered her name, Ailsa, his voice lost to the wind, but the seals heard, their eyes glowing, their barks a bridge between land and sea. The village, though healed, felt the sea's unease. Old Morag, her hands gnarled from years of weaving nets, spoke of shadows in the deep, lights that flickered beneath the waves, currents that turned without cause. "The sea's not done," she warned, her eyes on Calum. "Ye have returned the skin, but the gods don't forget." The villagers left offerings, fish, shells, woven reeds, at the cliffs their prayers fervent, but the seals grew restless, their barks sharper, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Calum felt it too, a tension in the air, a storm brewing beyond the stars, the sea's heart stirring with a new demand. One night, as the aurora danced across the sky, a ship arrived in Stromness. A sleek vessel from the mainland, its sails black as night, its crew cloaked in shadow. Its captain, a man named Lachlan Caer, was no fisherman. His eyes gleamed with a hunger older than greed, his voice smooth as he spoke of ancient relics of power hidden in the Orkney seas. He carried a book, its pages yellowed, its script filled with runes that matched the cliff's carvings. The Selkies guard a treasure, he told the tavern, his words sharp. A gift of Manannán MacLeod, a stone that binds the sea to the gods. I'll have it. The villagers recoiled, their hands clutching charms, but Lachlan's men were many, their lanterns casting harsh light across the shore. Calum watched from his cottage, his heart heavy with dread. The sea roared, its waves crashing higher, and Ailsa's song rose, a desperate cry that reached him through the storm. He ran to the cliffs, the wind tearing at him, and saw her. A silver streak in the waves, her eyes wide with fear. The Selkie queen appeared beside her, her wail a thunder that shook the sea, her form glowing with the wrath of the deep. They seek the heart, Ailsa sang, her voice breaking. The stone of Manannán hidden in the reef. Calum's mind raced, the old tales flooding back, Manannán MacLeod, the sea god whose gifts were both blessing and curse. The stone, the tales said, was a shard of his realm, a relic that held the sea's balance, guarded by Selkies for centuries. Lachlan's ship sailed toward the reef, its lanterns piercing the dark, its crew chanting words that twisted the air. The seals thrashed, their barks a warning, and the sea churned, waves rising like mountains. Ailsa swam closer, her form half-human, her eyes pleading. "Help us," she sang, her voice a tide that pulled at Calum's soul. He turned to the village, rallying the fishermen, their faces grim but resolute. Old Morag led them, her shell charm raised, her voice chanting prayers to the sea. They boarded their boats, their oars cutting through the storm, their lanterns flickering against the waves. Calum stood at the helm of his skiff, his eyes on Ailsa, her silver form guiding them to the reef. The Selkie queen's wail grew, a dirge that wove through the aurora, calling the sea's spirits to rise. Shadows moved beneath the waves, figures of light and kelp, their eyes burning, their voices a chorus of Manannán's wrath. Lachlan's ship reached the reef, its crew diving into the deep, their hands grasping for the stone. The sea rebelled, currents swirling, waves swallowing their lanterns. Ailsa dove, her form a streak of silver, her song a shield that pushed back the intruders. Calum rode closer, his heart pounding, the queen's wail afire in his blood. He saw the stone, a glowing shard, its runes pulsing with the sea's heartbeat, nestled in the reef's coral. Lachlan surfaced, his hands clutching it, his eyes wild with triumph. "It's mine," he roared, but the sea answered, a wave crashing over his ship, splintering its hull. The Selkie queen rose, her form towering, her wail a storm that shook the heavens. "You defile the heart," she sang, her voice a chorus of gods. The seals surged, their bodies a tide that overwhelmed Lachlan's men, dragging them into the deep. Ailsa swam to Calum, her eyes desperate. "Take it back," she pleaded, her hand guiding his to the stone. Calum dove, the sea's cold embrace a shock, his hands closing around the relic. Its warmth burned, its runes flaring, and he felt Manannán's gaze, a presence that judged his soul. He surfaced, the stone in his hands, and Ailsa's song rose, a melody that calmed the sea. The queen's wail softened, her form fading, her eyes on Calum a mix of gratitude and sorrow. The villagers cheered, their boats circling, their lanterns a beacon in the dark. Calum returned the stone to the reef, its light dimming, the sea's wrath easing. Ailsa swam beside him, her form shimmering, her voice a whisper. "Ye have saved us," she said, her eyes green as the deep. "But the sea keeps me." The storm passed, the aurora fading, the seals returning to their rocks. Calum stood on the shore, the village at his back, his heart heavy with Ailsa's words. Her song lingered, a lullaby that wove through the waves, a promise that she watched from the deep. The relic was safe, the curse held at bay, but Calum knew the sea's memory was long, its debts eternal. The Orkney seas lay restless under a sky bruised with clouds, their waves whispering secrets that curled around the cliffs of Stromness like a lover's lament. The village had settled into an uneasy calm after the night Lachlan Kea and his men were claimed by the deep, their ship a splintered memory swallowed by the reef. The seals returned to their rocks, their eyes no longer burning with rage but watching, waiting, as if the sea held its breath. Calum MacLeod's cottage stood silent, its hearth a flicker of light against the gloom, but his heart was a storm, tethered to Ailsa's song that still echoed in the waves. In the deep, Ailsa swam, her Selkie skin a shimmering cloak that bound her to the sea's heart. The coral halls glowed with an ancient light, their walls etched with runes that pulsed with the rhythm of the tides. She danced among her kin, their laughter a melody that wove through the currents, but her eyes turned upward to the surface where Calum walked the shore. The Selkie queen, her mother, swam beside her, her seaweed-tangled hair flowing, her voice a tide of warning. "Oh, the stone is safe," she sang, her eyes heavy with the weight of centuries. "But the sea's god watches, and his debts are not yet paid." Ailsa's heart ached, her songs laced with longing for the land, for Calum's weathered hands, his grey eyes that held her like the sea never could. She knew her origins now. Her blood was of Manannán MacLeod, the sea god whose realm spanned the waves, whose gifts bound the Selkies to his will. The stone in the reef, a shard of his divine power, was no mere relic but a heart that kept the sea's balance, its runes a pact between gods and mortals. Ailsa was its guardian, her mother its sentinel, but Calum's touch had stirred a ripple that reached the god's throne. On land, Calum's days were heavy with loss. He fished alone, his nets lighter without Ailsa's deft hands, his cottage cold without her songs. The villagers revered him, their offerings of shells and fish piling at the cliffs, their whispers calling him the man who faced the sea and lived. Old Morag visited, her gnarled hands clutching a charm of woven reeds. "Ye have done right by her," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "But Manannán's not one to forget. The sea's got a long memory, lad." Calum nodded, his heart heavy. The shell Ailsa had given him a weight in his pocket. The nights grew wilder, the sea stirring with a rhythm that felt alive. Lights flickered beneath the waves, not the lanterns of men but the glow of something ancient, something divine. The seals gathered, their barks a chorus that echoed Ailsa's songs, their eyes fixed on the reef. Calum felt it, a presence in the air, a pressure that pressed against his chest, as if the sea itself watched him. He walked the shore, his boots sinking into the sand, and heard her song, a lullaby that wove through the wind, calling him to the cliffs. One night, as the moon hung low, a vision came, a figure rising from the sea, not Ailsa or her mother, but a man cloaked in mist, his eyes the grey of a storm, his hair flowing like kelp. His presence was a tide, his voice a rumble that shook the cliffs. "I am Manannán MacLeod," he said, his words carrying the weight of the deep. Ye have touched my heart, mortal, and stirred its wrath. Calum fell to his knees, the shell in his hand trembling, Ailsa's song a faint echo in the distance. The god's eyes burned, his cloak rippling with waves, and the sea surged, waves crashing like thunder. Ailsa appeared, her silver form breaking the surface, her eyes wide with fear and defiance. He meant no harm, she sang, her voice a melody that pushed back the god's wrath. The Selkie queen joined her wail a chorus that wove with Ailsa, their forms glowing in the moonlight. Manannán's gaze softened, his voice a tide. The stone is my heart, he said. Its theft woke my anger, but its return woke my mercy. Yet a debt remains, Selkie daughter. Ailsa's heart sank, her eyes on Calum, knowing the sea's debts were never simple. The god raised his hand, and visions flooded Calum's mind. Ancient seas where Manannán sailed, his chariot drawn by waves, his gifts binding mortals to the deep. Selkies dancing under starlit skies, their skins are packed with the god. The stone, a shard of his throne, hidden to protect the balance. Ailsa was his kin, her blood a spark of his divine fire, her role as guardian a duty eternal. The land and sea are torn, Manannán said, his voice heavy. A mortal's love has broken the pact. Choose, daughter, return to the deep forever, or bind the mortal to us. Ailsa's eyes met Calum's, her song faltering, her heart torn between worlds. The villagers gathered, their lanterns flickering, their faces pale with awe. Old Morag stepped forward, her voice steady. Let her choose, she said, her charm raised to the god. The sea's taken enough. The seals thrashed, their barks a plea, and Ailsa swam closer, her form half-human, her hands reaching for Calum. I love ye, she whispered, her voice a tide that broke his heart. But the sea's my soul. Calum's voice cracked, his hand clutching the shell. I'd not bind ye, he said, his eyes on the god. Let her be free. Manannán's gaze shifted, his cloak calming, the sea's roar easing. A mortal's heart, he said, his voice a ripple. It weighs heavier than my wrath. He turned to Ailsa, his eyes softening. Sing for the balance, daughter, keep the stone safe and the mortal may walk free. Ailsa nodded, her song rising, a melody that wove land and sea, a lullaby that calmed the god's anger. The sea stilled, the lights beneath the waves fading, the seals returning to their rocks. Manannán vanished, his form dissolving into the mist, his presence a whisper in the wind. Ailsa swam to the shore, her eyes on Calum, her song a promise. I'll guard the stone, she said, her voice steady, but I'll sing for ye always. She dove, her silver form a streak in the waves, the seals following, their barks a farewell that lingered in the night. Calum stood alone, the village at his back, their lanterns a beacon of hope. The sea was calm, its surface a mirror reflecting the stars, but his heart was heavy with Ailsa's absence. Her song echoed, a lullaby that wove through the cliffs, a light in his darkened world. The villagers returned to their homes, their offerings renewed, their fear of the sea tempered by awe. The stone was safe, the balance restored, but Calum knew the sea's memory was long, its debts a tide that would return. The Orkney seas stretched endless under a sky of fading stars, their waves a soft lullaby that cradled the cliffs of Stromness in a fragile peace. The summer of 1843 had given way to autumn, the air sharp with salt and the promise of winter. Calum MacLeod's cottage stood alone, its stone walls weathered by gales, its hearth a flicker of warmth against the chill of loss. Ailsa's absence was a wound that bled quietly, her song a faint echo in the wind, a melody that lingered in the waves and haunted Calum's dreams. The village had settled into routine, its nets heavy with fish, its boats steady on calmer tides. But the seals watched from the rocks, their eyes a reminder of the sea's eternal gaze. In the deep, Ailsa swam, her Selkie skin a shimmering cloak that bound her to the sea's heart. The coral halls glowed with the light of Manannán MacLeod's realm, their runes pulsing with the rhythm of the tides. She was the guardian now, her mother's mantle passed to her, her songs a shield that kept the stones safe in the reef's embrace. The Selkie queen had faded, her wail a memory in the currents, her duty fulfilled. Ailsa danced among her kin, their laughter a chorus that wove through the kelp forests. But her heart turned to the shore, where Calum walked alone, his silhouette a beacon in her endless sea. Calum's days were marked by the sea's rhythm, casting nets at dawn, mending boats under the noon sun, walking the cliffs at dusk. The villagers revered him, their offerings of shells and fish piling at the shore, their whispers calling him the man who loved a Selkie and faced a god. Old Morag, her eyes dimming with age, sat by his hearth, her hands weaving reeds into charms. "Ye have given her back to the sea," she said, her voice a rasp. "But the deep never forgets a heart like yours." Calum clutched the shell Ailsa had given him, its surface worn smooth, its weight a tether to her song. The sea was calm, its surface a mirror reflecting the aurora's fleeting dance, but Calum felt a stirring, a ripple in the air that spoke of unfinished debts. The seals gathered at the cliffs, their barks softer now, their eyes not accusing but mournful. On moonlit nights, Ailsa's song rose, a lullaby that wove through the waves, reaching Calum's heart. He stood at the shore, his boots sinking into the sand, and answered with a whisper, "I hear ye," his voice lost to the wind but carried to the deep. The villagers noticed, their lanterns flickering as they watched him, their prayers mingling with the sea's hum. One winter night, as frost glittered on the cliffs, a vision came. A light beneath the waves, not the harsh glow of lanterns but a pulse, warm and alive from the reef. Calum walked to the shore, his heart pounding, and saw her. Ailsa, her silver form breaking the surface, her eyes green as the deep, her song a melody that stilled the wind. She was no longer just Selkie but something more, her presence radiant, her skin shimmering with runes that matched the stone, S. "I guard the heart," she sang, her voice a tide that warmed his soul. "But I sing for ye always." The seals circled, their barks a chorus that echoed her song, and Calum felt Manannán's presence, a shadow in the mist, watching but silent. Ailsa swam closer, her form half-human, her hand reaching for the shore. "The stone is safe," she said, her eyes on Calum. "The balance holds, but my heart is torn." Calum stepped into the shallows, the cold biting his legs, his hand clutching the shell. "I'd not bind ye again," he said, his voice steady despite the ache. "Ye are the seas, but ye are mine too." Ailsa's smile was a light in the dark, her song rising, a melody that wove land and sea into a single thread. The seals quieted, their eyes soft, and the sea stilled, its waves a gentle caress. She reached out, her fingers brushing his, a warmth that burned away the cold. "Manannán has granted me this," she whispered. "To sing for ye, to walk the shore one night each year under the winter moon." Calum's heart swelled, his tears mixing with the sea, the shell in his hand glowing faintly, as if blessed by the gods' mercy. The village gathered, their lanterns a circle of light, their faces awed but unafraid. Old Morag led them, her charm raised, her voice chanting a prayer to Manannán, not for forgiveness but for gratitude. Ailsa stepped onto the shore, her Selkie skin draped over her shoulders, her form human but radiant. She walked with Calum, their hands entwined, their steps a dance under the moon. The villagers sang, their voices joining hers, a ballad that echoed the old tales. Selkies who loved mortals, seas that spared the brave, gods who listened to a heart's truth. As dawn broke, Ailsa's form shimmered, her skin calling her back to the deep. She kissed Calum, her lips salt and starlight, her song a promise that lingered in the air. "Wait for me," she said, her eyes green as the sea. "Each winter moon I'll return." She dove, her silver form a streak in the waves, the seals following, their barks a farewell that wove into her lullaby. Calum stood alone, the shell warm in his hand, his heart full despite the emptiness. The years passed, Calum aging, his hair greying like the cliffs, his hands steady on the nets. Each winter moon Ailsa returned, her song a beacon, her presence a light that warmed his cottage. The villagers told their tale, weaving it into Orkney's folklore. A fisherman who loved a Selkie, a man who faced Manannán and won her heart. The seals watched, their eyes kind, their barks a chorus that carried Ailsa's song. The stone in the reef glowed, its runes a testament to the balance restored, its guardian eternal. Calum lived to an old age, his cottage a shrine to the sea, his hearth adorned with shells and reeds. He passed on a winter night, his hand clutching Ailsa's shell, his face peaceful as her song sang him to rest. The villagers found him, their lanterns flickering, their voices joining Ailsa's in a final lament. She appeared one last time, her silver form glowing, her song a melody that wove through the stars, carrying Calum to the deep. The legend of the Selkie grew, spreading across Orkney and beyond, a tale of love and sacrifice, of a sea that forgave but never forgot. Ailsa guarded the stone, her songs a thread in the sea's tapestry, her winter visits a light in Stromness's nights. The cliffs stood sentinel, their carvings whispering of Manannán's mercy, of a fisherman and a Selkie whose love bound land and sea. And in the waves, Ailsa's lullaby lingered, a song of sorrow and strength, a reminder that the sea's heart beat eternal, its debts paid in love.